Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for tonight's event, Monet in Mind, a Curator in Conversation. I'm thrilled to be here to introduce our participants and speakers for tonight, but briefly want to take a couple of moments just to introduce myself, the programme, and also to give a few bits of housekeeping information. I'm Catherine Dunleavy, the National Partners Programme Coordinator at the Courtauld Gallery, and I have the privilege of working with partners like the Ferens Art Gallery to pull together lots of different projects and exhibitions across the UK, just like Monet in Mind, which is the focus of today's event. Our Partners programme was inspired by Samuel Courtauld, one of our founders, who had a great passion for collecting and sharing art. And the programme works with 8 different partners, just like the Ferens, in towns and cities across the UK, to engage new audiences, to bring in volunteers in school programmes. And it's all based around enjoying art history and learning more about the local history of towns that used to have Courtaulds textile factories. And most of the time, they're quite close to our partners' sites. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about the programme and our other projects, but I would encourage you to take a look at our website to find out more. But tonight's event is our main focus, and we're here to look at Monet's Antibes painting, which is on display in Hull for the very first time as part of our collaboration with the Ferens Art Gallery and the Monet in Mind exhibition. I'm shortly going to hand over to Karen Sears, who is our Curator of Paintings at the Courtauld, and she's going to give a short presentation about the painting, about Monet's work, and also a little bit about the Courtauld collection. Then Stephanie Edwards from the Ferens will take over the second half of tonight's event, which is much more based on some insight into the exhibition and some questions from the Future Ferens, who are a young people's collective who researched and curated the exhibition. And I'm thrilled that some of them are able to join us tonight to put their questions directly to Karen as well. We're going to be sharing links to the online exhibition and to different websites and content throughout the talk, so keep an eye on the chat for that. We'll also be recording the event, so if you'd like to take another look in the future, it will be available on the Courtauld YouTube channel in the next week or so. And finally, we do encourage you to send us your questions tonight, whether it's for Karen or for the Future Ferens and the team at the Ferens. So do pop those into the chat box and we'll try and get to as many of those as possible. I'd just like to finish by thanking our participants for joining me tonight. I'm sure it's going to be a really fascinating event and hopefully you'll enjoy it. I'd also like to thank the Research Forum, who are providing the backup, the IT and all of our support tonight as well. And most of all, Stephanie and the Future Ferens team for putting together such a wonderful exhibition. I was lucky enough to see it myself over the weekend, and I hope those of you that live nearby that haven't had a chance to yet will be able to go in the next couple of weeks. And everybody else, the online exhibition is also fantastic and there's loads of content. So I hope you'll be able to take a look at that instead. But I don't want to take up too much time. I'm sure we're all really keen to find out more about the exhibition. So I'm going to hand over to Karen Sears.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's a real pleasure for me to be here this evening. And I have to say that working with our partners these past years and focusing on specific works and specific impressionist highlights in our collection has been an absolutely fantastic way to engage with our collection, engage with young curators, and also just on a very selfish level for me to really look at these works that I know so well, but look at them with new eyes. So it's been a huge pleasure. So this evening I'm going to tell you a little bit about Antibes. By Monet. So focusing on the painting itself, and then we can talk about the exhibition more generally. This painting is a really fascinating work. As Catherine mentioned, it's part of the 60 or so major Impressionist masterpieces that were purchased in the 1920s and 1930s by the founder of the Courtauld, Samuel Courtauld, who was buying at a time that these Impressionist work were incredibly successful throughout Europe, but not so much in the UK. And so he played a huge role in actually bringing them to the UK. And so he actually bought works for the national collections, which can be seen today at the National Gallery and Tate, but also for his private collection. And these are very much works that he lived with. And Antibes was very much one of those works that he said he needed to be able to look at it every day and feel something new and different every day. So that is a good reason to not come to the exhibition once, but several times, because I think every time you see something new. So this work was created in 1888. And so I don't want to kind of rehearse Monet's entire biography, but what was happening to him in the 1880s. So here I just show you a self-portrait created just a few years before he painted Antibes. In 1874, very famously, he participated in the first Impressionist exhibition in Paris, and indeed, it's one of his works that was that gave the name to the Impressionist movement. His work Impression Sunrise was derided by one of the critics as unfinished and not very polished and not very well made. And he said, oh, Mr. Monet should go back to his studio and finish this work. Indeed, it really only gives an impression. And this group of painters that was really acting outside of the official tradition, the official fine art academies, really embraced that term, impressionists, and so they became the Impressionist group, and they exhibited together for another decade or so. But by the mid 1880s, they had dispersed. Some of them had changed their style, had evolved. They had started working elsewhere, and Claude Monet was one of them, in that his style remained incredibly faithful to Impressionism, but he had started looking further afield. He had always been a huge traveler, and so he was actually he was born in Paris, but he was raised in Normandy. And here I'm showing you a canvas that's in the Courtauld collection by an artist called Eugène Boudin, who is not an impressionist, but was actually a very important artist for Monet, who knew him as a young man. And it is Boudin who encouraged Monet to start painting out of doors, which is something that artists very seldom did at that moment. We have such an image of the artist as grabbing their portable easels and their straw hats, but actually most of the art, even landscapes, were created in the studio. But Boudin had this huge effect on Monet, and off they went through Normandy, painting skies and beaches and the city and all sorts of things. So Monet was very much a northerner. He was, between Paris and Normandy. He also traveled to London, to the Netherlands. So this idea of traveling south. I also wanted to show you some of another work in the Courtauld that he was creating around the time that the first Impressionist exhibition took place, as I mentioned, and it's this wonderful autumn effect at Argenteuil. Argenteuil is where Monet lived, and it was a small town outside of Paris, and he lived there because it was cheaper than living in Paris. And you can see here the way that he renders the beautiful contrast between the autumn colors, the orange of the leaves, and then the blue of the water. But it's very much this notion of a northern light with seasons and looking at the changing seasons that was important to him. So going south to the south of France, where Antibes is, was actually a big deal. I think today we don't quite realize it, but the south of France was very far. And here I'm just showing you this map to show you that there were a couple of huge mountain ranges in the middle. And I'm just highlighting here. So you have Le Havre in yellow, where Monet grew up, Paris, where he resided, and then Antibes in the bottom right, where he went. And so this idea of people from the north of France going down to the south for holidays, for sightseeing, was again something that we take for granted, but was actually very new at that time, and was made possible by the construction of a new specific railroad line in around 1850. And so the movement of people increased. And the South also modernized as well. And then another important kind of date is 1860, when Nice and its surroundings became part of France. Before they had been part of Italy. And so here you can see how close Antibes is to the Italian border. And so that border kept changing over the centuries, but now Antibes was firmly part of France. And so why would Monet go south? He had been painting for several decades in the north, but one aspect would obviously be to escape the harsh winters. And indeed, so he went south 3 times, and all 3 times it was during the winter, in December, and then January through March. So that was definitely kind of an important aspect. Another important aspect was, of course, this idea of light, because for him, it presented a new challenge. He was so attuned to the light, and he said he knew what northern light looked like, but actually to embrace the southern light was something completely new. And he said it actually frightened him a little bit. And another aspect is that he was very, very interested in nature and vegetation and trees. And so the landscape of the South was also incredibly different. And so that was also an important aspect, I think, that pushed him. So by his first trip, he was already 43 years old. So that was, he had already had quite a career. And so he first traveled with his friend Pierre-Auguste Renoir, another impressionist, and they went to, sorry, I'll go back to the map. They went from Marseille all the way along the coast to Genoa. And then they stopped and visited Cézanne. And so that's why I've surrounded in purple, Aix-en-Provence. They visited Paul and Cézanne on the way back. So there was really this idea of a community of artists as well being attracted to the South. But then in 1884, and then again in 1888, which is the date of our painting, Monet went back on his own. And he stayed there between 3 and 5 months at a time, as I said, mostly kind of spending the winter there. And while he was there in 1888, he stayed at this place, the Pension Château de la Pinède, and that you see very helpfully. It doesn't exist anymore. There's a hotel at its place that's called Hôtel de la Pinède. Modest lodgings with free Wi-Fi. And so that's where he stayed. And it was actually a hotel that was recommended to him as being frequented by a lot of artists. But actually, during his correspondence home, he said that they were absolutely insufferable. And so he wanted to escape them and work alone. One of the things that has One of the things that I really love about Monet is how incredibly committed he was to this idea of working out of doors. And so weather conditions never stopped him. And this is one of my favorite paintings in Orsay. So we're very far from the north. But Monet is actually said, I haven't kind of done an extensive research to see if that's true, but I think it's possible. He's one of the very, very few artists to depict snow, because he was basically out there painting with his easel in the snow. And whatever the weather conditions, after other artists had given up, he continued to work outdoors. And so this is something that that was also the case in the south. And you can see in Antibes this pine tree that has been completely kind of twisted by the force of the wind, that is no longer straight, but has is kind of blown over. And in Monet's correspondence, he kind of lists all of the difficulties that he has, that he encounters in the south. So too much sun, he says he's getting eye strain and fatigue, these bursts of wind, so he has to tie down his easel. Sometimes there's nonstop rain, and then just this luxuriant nature that that never stops growing. So he's finding slightly new challenges than what he encountered in the north. But one of the main reason that he went south was really to find, as I mentioned, this a new challenge in how to capture light. And this light, as you can see by the many quotes that he writes in his correspondence to his family and to dealers and to friends, is something that is really, really passionate. And it's the intensity of the light and the intensity of the colors that was of interest to him. And you can see in many cases he talks about the pinks and the blues, which is very much something that you see in Antibes. And the very last line, one swims in blue air, and it is frightening. It's something that I think we can definitely feel when we look at Antibes. So he returned, Monet returned to Paris in May 1888. With 38 canvases, so 38 canvases in 5 months. Not all of them were actually finished. Sometimes he started a canvas and then set it aside and then returned to it. And interestingly, it's not like he just kind of chose a different site every day. He went around the city and the mountains, looking for motifs with a sketchbook. And then when he had found them, then he took his easel and his paints. So actually, he really only focused on about 5 main motifs during his time there, really returning to them over and over. And when he returned to Paris, he had an exhibition. In June 1888, he exhibited 10 of these 38 canvases that he had done in Antibes at a Parisian gallery. And here I'm showing you 3 of them. So our painting Antibes, but then these other two views. And the person who organized this exhibition was actually Theo van Gogh, who is the brother of Vincent van Gogh. And Theo worked for an art dealer called Bousseau and Valadon, and he had a very good eye. So he actually purchased these 10 works for 12,000 francs, and 7 of them sold within a couple of months, and then the other 3 sold the following year. And overall, they made 28,000 francs, so more than doubling. And actually, Monet very smartly had an interest as well. So he did also get money from the profit. But this is just to show that actually Monet, by that time, by the late 1880s, was having solo exhibitions, was incredibly successful, and he would be so for the rest of his life, which was really another 30 years. So a very important thing happened in the South, which is this the beginning of what we call seriality. So basically, I've added this work at the beginning, at the bottom right, which shows you that it's the exact same place as Pine Trees, Cap d'Antibes in the upper right, but taken at a different moment. You can feel the sunset on the trunks. And so this is the beginning, and I told you about these main motifs that Monet really focused on. And this is the beginning of him really working in series. I think we associate that a lot with him, but this is really something that happened in in the 1890s, mostly with the haystacks and his cathedrals. But here we see in the South the beginning of this idea of going to sorry, of going to a motif and reworking it all the time. And such is the case with our painting. And so you see this other work, very, very similar, who is now in Japan, but has very different colors. So gone are the blues and the pinks that appear in our painting. And here it gives you a very different, a very different idea, a very different notion of the time of day. So this was a very important aspect for Monet. And then I mentioned that in the 1890s, this idea of seriality. So here I'm just showing you a few of his poplars on the Epte River, which is near Giverny, where he lived. And so this idea of really just returning to a motif, and especially trees, like in Antibes, to really look at them at different moments of the day, of the year, in different weather conditions. And all of that really started majorly in the South. So let's focus a little bit on Antibes itself. I mentioned that he was staying at his at the Pension Château de la Pinède in Antibes. And so here the arrow, my colleagues and I have spent endless hours on Google Earth just trying to make sure that we kind of got the view that he was looking at. And actually right in front of his hotel is a little beach that is called the Jardin de la Pinède, so basically the pine gardens, and so which does have these direct access to the water and these pine trees. And so you can see how the view is looking across the bay to the mountains on the other side that are called the Esterel Mountains, and that his view actually just hits the side, just a little bit of the Île Sainte Marguerite in the middle of that bay, and I've kind of put a red square around that, just a little that little portion of the island that Monet captures. And so here you get a sense that he really is striving to convey a very specific sense of place, and also this idea of capturing the light that is very, very important to him. We do get kind of letters from people in the south of France who have visited the South saying, oh yes, like they can actually identify every single mountain on in the background. There, I say mountain, but actually they're quite a low range. But so Monet was incredibly it was very important for him to observe his surroundings. However, this is just a letter that Vincent wrote to his brother Theo, as I mentioned, who organized this exhibition in which Antibes was, and he is just reporting some gossip from, or maybe the opinion of a shared friend of theirs, and who says that Monet, after seeing the exhibition, he said, "Oh, but." Really, from the point of view of a whole number of laws of nature, he's pretty well hopeless. So this, on the one hand, he really observes things very closely, but on the other, of course, there's a huge artistic license, and what he is trying to give you is literally the impression of what it is to be in the South and being surrounded by this blue air, as he mentioned. But there's one very important aspect that maybe gets overlooked, and that is Monet's love of Japanese art. And here I'm showing you on the left a print that is actually in, well, a version of this print is in his collection. And you can see this motif of the kind of ragged tree that is then applied, kind of that is applied to a background in a quite flat way, as a contrast. So really the dark tree and then the lighter background in the distance is something that was very, very typical in Japanese art. And Monet owned over 120 Japanese prints. So as I said, including this one, they were displayed all over his house in Giverny. And he was very aware of this motif, as were other artists at the time. These Japanese prints were a huge source of inspiration for artists. And here I'm showing you just two others where you have the same idea of just this kind of lonely tree, really the trunk really delineated, and in both cases they're pine trees, delineated against this background, kind of almost juxtaposed on top of him. So Japanese prints had a huge impact on Monet's compositions, but also on his garden in Giverny. And here I'm just showing you his very famous Japanese bridge that he had built. And that is also a motif that he never traveled to Japan, I should say. That's a motif he took from Japanese prints as well. And on the right is an earlier canvas of his wife dressed in a kimono and with all sorts of Japanese fans and imagery in the background. So to finish, I've talked a lot about the circumstances of the creation of this work, of Monet traveling south and everything that he wanted to get from his trip. But there's one thing that's very difficult to do on Zoom, and that is to really look at Monet's mark making specifically, and his unique brushstrokes. So you'll have to go see the original. But I want to note that his style, and here I'm showing you just a close-up of the rocks in the water. His style, and indeed the impressionist style in general, is really one where you really see the brushwork, you see the brushstrokes made by the artist. So in many ways, you're almost looking over their shoulder, and they're inviting you to see how a painting is put together. Traditionally at that period, in the more kind of academic circles, and I mentioned the fine arts academies, the idea was that the artists needed to erase themselves. And so the surface needed to be as smooth and polished as possible. Whereas here, I mentioned the criticism of his work, a critic saying, oh, his work is unfinished. But here it's because you see every mark that he's made. And I think that's, which is why this exhibition is so wonderful, because what it does, it actually forces you to slow down. In front of such a painting, you can't just look at it and say, oh yes, that's fine. Oh, it's an image of a tree. You have to look closely. Every brushwork is different. Every color is different. Every rendering is different. And it makes you think about how the image was put together, how the artist did it. He also, here I love those tiny little dots are actually sailboats on the left. And then the more kind of orangey, smaller dots are the houses along the coastline of the bay. And then of course you have the beautiful pinks in the mountains as the sun is setting on them. So as I mentioned, he also, for Monet was also very important for the viewers to consider the environment in which he made his paintings. And so I mentioned how important he or how hard he tried to capture the quality of light, of shifting light, of the shifting weather and of the seasons. And so I think for viewers, it really forces you to also think about your own environment and your your own conditions where you are, and to really be in the present and notice things that you tend to overlook or take for granted. So this is really something that that I think Impressionism does beautifully, and Monet was really one of the absolute masters of that. And here's a closer look at the tree. You just think, oh yes, it's brown and green, but he's used blue to create shadows, and then some orange, and all of these things can be seen when you look closely at the work, and the work invites you to do so. So thank you so much for your attention, and I want to say again, congratulations to the Future Ferens group, which has done an incredible job. And I think I'm going to pass it over to Steph to tell us a little bit more about it.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a wonderful insight into Monet and Antibes. I want to go see the painting all over again, so I'll have to go back to my gallery and do so. And I'm Stephanie Edwards. I am an exhibitions assistant at the Ferens Art Gallery, and I have had the pleasure of working on the Monet in Mind exhibition, which is open at the Ferens until the 4th of July. And I'm here with the Future Ferens, and as Catherine mentioned before, the Future Ferens are a young group of volunteers at the Ferens who are interested in art, who are aspiring curators, those that are creative and want to work in the industry as well. And they've been working with us over the past year on this project to bring to you the Monet in Mind exhibition. Now, they have joined us from the start of the project, where we gave the vote of which artwork to loan from the Courtauld over to the public, and the public chose Antibes, and I'm so thankful they did, because it is a wonderful painting to be able to get to know really intimately. And from that point on, the Future Ferens came up with the concept for an exhibition. They wanted to combine the beauty and intelligence of Monet's paintings with the practice of mindfulness to give a new way of appreciating art. And they worked together to design and curate the exhibition Monet in Mind, and partnered the Monet with a series of artworks from the Ferens Art Gallery permanent collection. And they found new immersive ways for visitors to enjoy, either from home over the internet or visiting the exhibition in person, creating soundscapes and playlists and new poetry to share their perspective of the artworks, just as Monet shared his impression of Antibes. And this evening we wanted to get together with the Courtauld, with Karen, to have a discussion, have a conversation, to ask questions about Monet, about Antibes, and about curating exhibitions and curating the Monet in Mind exhibition itself. So if I welcome on to join us the Future Ferens, they'll start joining us now. And we've got August, we've got Molly, we've got Gemma, and we've got Jess. And they've got a few questions that they'd like to ask. Karen, feel free to share your own questions as well, put them on the spot. And for you, the audience as well, it would be wonderful if you have any questions to pop them on the chat, and we'll have a short time at the end where we can pick a couple of questions as well. So Future Ferens, over to you.
Hi Karen, thanks so much for all the really fascinating information about Monet. Obviously we've researched it quite a bit, but you brought a new level of depth and research to it that we haven't been able to acquire, so thanks for a really fascinating talk. And obviously you talked about Monet exhibiting some of the works he produced in Antibes. And the first question I think we're going to ask is, what do you think Monet would have thought of our exhibition? If you can give us maybe some insight from your reading of his letters and things.
That's a very difficult question. Of course, I can't say that I'm speaking for Monet, but what we know of him is actually that he was very nervous exhibiting his work, and even though I mentioned by the 1880s he was a hugely recognized artist, and he was able to to live off from his work and purchased a large estate in Giverny, but he was still incredibly insecure, and so that's also part of the reason that he had such a lot of correspondence, that he was constantly writing to his dealers and his friends and trying to explain what he was trying to do so that people understood. So I think it's double, because on the one hand he wanted to direct people to see what he saw, but on the other hand I think, and that's what's so wonderful about your exhibition, is actually putting him in that context really allows you to see all sorts of things in Antibes that he probably would have no idea about. So I don't know how you would feel by being seen alongside other artists. But I should also say, I mentioned this commitment. I have just this vision of him, kind of with his easel in the wind and the snow. And for him, I think before its time, the notion of mindfulness was very important, because he was able to just concentrate on one motif and just give it its all. And he always found something new, even if he had portrayed it 50 times. And I think that's a really, I mean, I've always found that quite fascinating. And so seeing it in the context of your show, it just kind of brings to light that actually for him, what that must have meant to him to go back to the same place, but to see something different.
Thank you.
Another question that we had was, what does Impressionism mean to you?
That is a tricky question. Well, we're very blessed at the Courtauld, because, as I mentioned, the collection that was put together by Samuel Courtauld is a collection that he didn't assemble in a very kind of linear way. He just literally bought what he liked, what was on the market at that time, what he liked. It's not like he said, okay, I'm going to have 3 paintings by Monet, 3 paintings by Renoir. And so he, and as I mentioned, he had to live with these works, and it was very important for him that they brought him something. And and I think actually it's mentioned in one of your films, this notion of the democratic nature of Impressionism is really fascinating. I think today we tend to forget how really radical it was at the time. I mean, it was really considered outrageous. And that was for 2 reasons. I mentioned the stylistic aspect, this idea of unfinished and broken brushwork, and so the style that you can actually see the painter at work as opposed to obliterating any trace is one aspect. But then the other aspect is the subject matter, because they represented either scenes from daily life so that people actually understood, could recognize them, or landscapes, again, so somewhere that you can just, that you didn't have to know, Roman history or religion or whatever, and you could understand it, and it could speak to you immediately. So for me, the very democratic aspect of Impressionism is fascinating, including in their subject matter.
Thank you.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, can you hear me? Has it come through?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, so expanding on that, of the works Monet produced in Antibes, what is your favourite? And how high is the Courtaulds Antibes on the list?
That too is a trick question. I'm going to be on record as No, I'm sorry. I am going to be very, very boring and say that our painting is is the one that I love most. No, and actually, I will tell you why I love it. I love it because, and actually, that's also something that your exhibition, I think, brings out very fascinatingly, is the fact that that the South was actually a place that was starting to be really built up, as it is today. You know, the villas were, and a lot of places were kind of sprouting up on the beaches and the coast. But Monet really focused on the landscape and the kind of the trees and the vegetation and the light. And I think that's what I love about Antibes. It's a little bit more timeless than any of his other, even though even the fort of Antibes is is very old, obviously, but still the notion of just not, of just people and houses just being little dots, and it just makes the whole thing more timeless. So I think that's why I love our work.
So we also wanted to ask, why do you think that Monet has become so synonymous with the Impressionist movement? And do you think that this reputation is justified? Or are there any sort of lesser known Impressionist artists that you think deserve more acclaim that people might not have heard of?
Yes, that's a good question. I might actually I will answer, but I think I'd be really interested to hear about your thoughts, actually. Because this idea of artists that are now ubiquitous, even when Samuel Courtauld was collecting, that wasn't a given. We now think, of course, Monet is super famous and has become kind of a synonym for painting. But even at that time, his reputation was still, as I said, in the UK, was not cemented by any means. So I think it's very interesting how artistic reputation gets built and solidified. I think Monet was is the embodiment of Impressionism, because not only did one of his works give that name to the movement, but he's also the one who really stuck throughout his life. I mean, he died very old. He died after the First World War. He died in 1924. So 4 or 6. Oh, I'm having a senior moment. Sorry. So anyway, he lived a very, very long life, and he painted until the end. And he really always stuck to that idea of painting out of doors and painting these motifs. And indeed, towards the end of his life, he almost moved towards abstraction. So whereas other artists in that movement only maybe stayed within the movement for about 10 years and then moved to other styles. So I think it's entirely deserved that he is the embodiment of Impressionism in that way. So I don't think any other artist really encapsulates the movement as brilliantly as he does.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're just going to move on to some more questions about curating in general now, because I'm mindful that we're starting to eat through our time. So I think the first thing was that we talked about seeing Monet's works in other contexts, and that obviously involved bringing other artworks and artists. So what would your personal favourite series of works that you've curated together as a collection they've brought together for an exhibition or something be, and why do you think they work well together as artworks, and what tips would you give for curators to put works together on the wall?
That's also very difficult.
It's a big question.
I have to say, sorry, I'm going to do a massive kind of deviation, but I really love the way that you use color in your exhibition. I think there are two things that are super difficult. The first is just choosing what you include, and indeed what you don't include, because so many times you just want to kind of add, thinking, oh, more is more, but actually no, it's actually the kind of really tailoring down that's difficult, and what can be the most profitably used towards your argument. So that's one aspect. And actually just the very fact of putting one work next to another work, I mean, that's the beginning of curating. You're making this decision. And then the second most difficult thing is choosing a wall color by far, because when the wall color doesn't work and kills the works of art on it, then your whole exhibition goes. And when it does work, nobody ever notices. They're just like, oh yes, of course, these works look wonderful. And I think, but anyway, I think the way that you've used color is really great, because you've used the wall colors to make your point. And I think that's a very important thing, because that's another difficult aspect of curating, because the first, people shouldn't have to read, you know, panels and panels to understand what you're trying to say. There has to be a first instinctive aspect to coming into an exhibition. And so with your wall color, you were really, and kind of by having the Monet, you know, on its own kind of separate little square, but then you know, using white and blue elsewhere, you articulate the space in a great way that helps people to then read your interpretation and then understand what you're trying to convey. So I think you did that. You did that brilliantly. And I'm going to answer your question again deviously by saying one of the, I'm not really going to talk about an exhibition, but more actually the permanent collection, how we hang Antibes at the Courtauld. Until our recent kind of closure, Antibes was hung alongside other works from the 1880s by other Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. So we kind of went chronological. But then I saw it hanging alongside Autumn Effect at Argenteuil, which I showed you, which, you know, there's like 15 years between the two. But actually, to see them together, I think made a very powerful statement to me about the difference, as I mentioned, between the northern light, that the light of the north of France that Monet was trying to capture, and the southern light. And so actually, we're going to put them together in when we reopen side by side, to really, I hope, to convey that aspect of Monet's work. So kind of more focus on him and what he was trying to do, as opposed to place Antibes with works from that same moment, but by other artists.
Thank you very much. That actually answers one of our later questions as well, so thank you.
Yeah, we were wondering what for you is like the most rewarding aspect of curating. Maybe it's choosing the correct wall color.
No, as I said, there's you get no glory for choosing the right wall color. It's only so that your exhibition works, and you want the work to to shine. Really, that's your job. I think the most rewarding thing, and I hope that you've felt that as well, is once you put works side by side, and it has to be the real works side by side. You when they speak to each other, all of a sudden in ways that actually you hadn't anticipated, so that's incredible. I mean, obviously you chose them side by side for a reason, but then all of these other connections come out, and that's when you know that you made a good choice, and you hope that people will also get those connections, and actually they also see connections of their own, and that they tell you about, and that's also wonderful. Have you found that in how did you feel when the works actually went up? How different was it from on paper, or not?
I think it.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Sorry, can you go on, Jess?
No, you go.
I think one of the main things that stood out to us was because we designed the exhibition fully online, how much I think for the frames really brought the works together. and providing something continuous. We'd never seen the works framed before,
Yeah.
and or even the actual sizes of them, because on a you might have the dimensions of it, but on a 2D screen you don't really feel the difference of it. So I think there was one instance where I think we had two double hangs of quite small paintings, and the way they worked together really made a big difference, at least for me, than how I appreciated them also. And then the place they had in the exhibition changed a lot. So.
And did you have to change anything from your kind of virtual hang to your physical hang?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were a couple of works that we definitely, I think it was the pier was one we noticed was a lot brighter in person, and there was another one which was a lot darker. I think there was the Kidia wood. So we had to move some around based on like the actual colors and the way they interact with the light a bit more compared to, again, how we've seen them digitally.
Yeah, it's amazing how, yeah, that makes a huge kind of difference. Yeah. How about you, Gemma? What did you find?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was continuously sort of changing when we was reviewing everything, especially what was most challenging I found was not being able to meet in person, obviously. And because we all live in different locations and viewing them within the physical gallery space. And I know we reflected on a lot of like words such as acceptance and things like that to do with mindfulness in a way of sort of grouping them together, which I found quite unique in a way of bringing mindfulness to connect those words together. So although you're looking at ways of techniques and colours, we were looking at the use of words and language as well in a way of curating the works in an exhibition. So for me that was quite touching, and it sort of reflects on the language of Monet and his work, and the way he sort of speaks within his work, in the colour, within the silence of that. So I really enjoyed being able to pick out those sort of things around the works.
How about you, Molly? What was your experience actually hanging the works and seeing them in the flesh?
It was really interesting when we finally got to see them in the flesh, because we'd been planning everything online up until then, and we'd had a lot of sort of setbacks of all of the different rule changes and things, and it was a completely different experience to see them in person, and like August was saying, like some of them looked a lot more different in person than they did online, and with the frames and things like that, and we saw that maybe some that we thought would work together didn't work quite so well, so it was so good to finally be able to get in there and see them, and it was just, yeah, like a completely different experience, and I think like the whole fact that we didn't get to see them sort of till the end, and all of the challenges of like trying to organize the exhibition sort of through the pandemic and things like that, was like one of the main reasons why we decided to sort of focus on the mindfulness. And I think when we finally got to go and sort of see the paintings, and I only recently got to actually see the exhibition, when it all sort of came together, despite all the sort of challenges that we'd had for it, I think it really came together so well, and like what we were trying to say really comes across in the exhibition, and yeah, I'm just really pleased with it overall.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think, yeah, your theme is so, yeah, it's really, really fascinating. I can't really think of any other instance where that's been done. And I think what you're trying to do with your visitors when you curate is you want to guide them. You know, an exhibition is you have an argument behind, you know, a purpose, but then you also want to give them kind of some freedom. And I think your exhibition really does that beautifully, because everybody can kind of interpret, you know, you give them a lot of tools, and you give them a lot of kind of a lot of help and a lot of resources, but at the same time, it's also great that they just they're able to experience the exhibition, and it's going to say something different to every individual. And that's really, I mean, well done. That's super difficult to do, and that's great.
I think that it's a lot of hard work went into choosing the accompanying artworks to go with the Monet, and a lot of edits down from a large selection to start off with. And we've had one question from the audience I'd just like to pose as well. There's we found a lot of artworks and artists that perhaps were influenced by Monet. And Karen, I wonder if you could answer the length and breadth of Monet's influence on British artists, and perhaps how much do you think that British landscape artists, for instance, were more traditional of mind?
I can absolutely not answer that question. I'm very, very sorry. Because I have to say, no, Impressionism and Post-Impressionism is my specialty. I don't know much about modern British art, I'm sorry to say. But that said, sorry, I'm being a bit jokey. But yes, Monet was absolutely crucial. But as I mentioned, it was mostly artists who saw his work, who were able to go on the continent, because up until the 20s and 30s, he was not, you couldn't really see his work. I think there was one painting in the public collection, but it wasn't always on view. So actually seeing his work was not easy. And as we mentioned, you really need to see it in person to really understand the brushwork. And what he was trying to do. So it's really the artists who were able to, and indeed there were a lot that were influenced, but it's really the ones who were able to travel on the continent. That said, the notion of painting outdoors and really working on the motif is something that was really kind of spearheaded by, even though artists before had done it, very few of them, but it was something that became incredibly well known. And indeed, actually, I should say that Monet took refuge in London during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. So he did meet British artists at that time. But his work was not well known in depth, I should say. So yes, this idea of the reception of his art is really interesting. But the notion of working out of doors, I think, is something that his legacy was crucial for.
Yeah, and I think you can find that for quite a few of the artists that were picked in the exhibition. That was something that came through, that appreciation of working out of doors. And that's something that Future Ferens were definitely keen to highlight as a tool, as a way of working and practicing mindfulness itself. So thank you. And thank you, Future Ferens, for all the questions. And thank you, Karen. It's been wonderful to be with you for the event tonight. It's been great to just be in conversation about Monet and Antibes. It's been wonderful. And
we've all been transported to the south of France.
Yeah.
But most crucially, I want to say again, well done. And I think the theme is so fantastic. And I'll never look at our work in a different way. And I think also that's what makes the best exhibitions, is how appropriate and topical they are for their time, and how they speak to people today. And as I said, it also is the mark of a great work, that it can still talk to people and have something important to say across the centuries. So well done for really spotlighting that.
Wonderful. Thank you. And to all audience, I hope you come and visit Monet and Mind exhibition at the Ferens and see all the hard work displayed for you to enjoy. And if you don't get a chance to visit, then visit monetandmind.com and you can explore the exhibition online instead. Thank you very much. Bye now.
Thank you.